Sean Diddy Combs was convicted on 2 federal charges, each carrying up to 10 years in prison. But now, in a twist maybe no one saw coming, reports say President Donald Trump's team has been in talks with Diddy's lawyers about a possible presidential pardon. Could Trump really set Diddy free? Is this justice, politics, maybe payback?
The air inside that courtroom was heavy, the kind of heavy you feel in your chest, not just in your lungs. Every person in the room seemed to know that they were about to witness a defining moment in music industry history. The wood-paneled walls, the polished tables, the faint scent of paper and cologne, all of it felt staged.
After this whole criminal trial, 7 weeks of testimony and a verdict that ended in Sean Diddy Combs' conviction on 2 federal sex crimes charges, could he be pardoned by the President of the United States? You know, that is a question that came up a lot when we were doing the live streams of the Diddy trial every day on YouTube. I never really considered it as a real possibility, but I'll tell you what, now, based on current reporting, we may have to take this seriously. Oh, and in terms of relief for Diddy, we also have to get into his defense team's new memo that they filed arguing that his conviction should be thrown out, or at the very least, he should get a new trial. We're going to talk about that too. And by the way, let me tell you, we have an amazing guest who I'm going to be bringing on in a little bit, somebody who actually helped secure federal pardons for his clients, including from President Trump, and is an expert in criminal law, has been following this case from the very beginning. I'm going to bring him on in a little bit. But why do I say that we have to take pardons seriously now? Why? Well, TMZ has reported that President Donald Trump's administration has been talking to Diddy's legal team about a potential pardon, a forgiveness for a federal crime. It's enshrined in the Constitution. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1, the president shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. And according to TMZ, his decision to pardon Diddy may be determined based on if Judge Arun Subramanian grants Diddy bail, which, by the way, we dedicated a whole sidebar to the other day. His team just filed a brand new letter with the court asking for him to be released. I broke it down, discussed all those arguments. But TMZ also has reported that the pardon decision could also come down to how Diddy is ultimately sentenced on October 3rd. And remember, he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, but he was found guilty of the 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, the Mann Act violations, namely transporting his exes, Jane and Cassie Ventura Fine, and men across state lines for the purposes of sex work. Each charge carries up to 10 years in prison, although I'll tell you, in a prior filing, the government was looking at roughly 4 to 5 year prison sentence. Mind you, this is before a pre-sentencing report has been prepared for the court, which does a full background check and analysis of Diddy's life and crimes. Now, the defense would definitely love time served and he gets out, or 21 to 27 months. And remember, at the time of sentencing, he'll have been locked up for a full year, so he'll get credit for that. And the judge has discretion here because there's no mandatory minimum when it comes to these. Let's say he gets 5 years in prison. Trump pardons him. He's free to go. President Trump was asked about this a few months ago before the verdict. This was back in May. And he said, when asked about a pardon for Diddy, I would certainly look at the facts. If I think somebody was mistreated, whether they like me or don't like me, it wouldn't have any impact on me. He used to really like me a lot, but I think when I ran for politics, that relationship busted up from what I read. I don't know, he didn't tell me that, but I'd read some little bit nasty statements in the paper all of a sudden. And Diddy had been photographed with Trump over the years. There was some sort of relationship there. President Trump even called him a good friend on a 2012 episode of his TV show, The Apprentice. The problem is, some comments Diddy made about Trump in recent years as Diddy really entered the political realm. There's a video where he's speaking to radio host Charlemagne saying, if Trump gets elected, I really do believe in my heart there'll be a race war. In another video on Revolt, he says white men like Trump need to be banished. And by the way, you know who's not letting anyone forget this? Combs' rival 50 Cent. Took to social media recently, wrote, see, Trump don't like S like this, buddy. You run your mouth too much. And Donald doesn't take well to disrespect and doesn't forget who chooses to go against him. While working tirelessly to make America great again, there is no room for distract.
Like a set for a movie. But this wasn't fiction. This was the endgame for Sean Diddy Combs. And the script wasn't his to control anymore. 4 weeks. The trial had been a spectacle, 1 part legal battle, 1 part media circus, and 1 part public dissection of a man who once seemed untouchable. The prosecution had pulled no punches. Witness after witness took the stand, their testimonies layered with both damning detail and emotional weight. The defense, in contrast, leaned heavily on Diddy's legacy, his contributions to music, and the suggestion that this was all part of a larger smear campaign. But no matter how skilled the attorneys, no matter how polished the cross-examinations, There was always this undercurrent in the room, a feeling that the tide wasn't in Diddy's favor, and by the time the final day arrived, you could see it in his body language. He still wore the expensive suit, his tie was perfectly knotted, but his eyes betrayed the storm raging inside. The gallery was packed. Reporters with notepads and recorders sat shoulder to shoulder with curious spectators.
User that they love them or that they want more of what took place. However, there are other people who see it from maybe more so the lens of a victim or someone who's been abused, who would say, you know what, that's not so beyond the pale of reason, because the abuse has been so entrenched in this person's mind that they then fall in love with their abuser. And so that's not something that they would, look askance upon or look down upon. So, one of the things about being in trial that I always remind my clients, is that despite all the rules that the judge gives people, no one leaves their life experience or their opinions at the courthouse door. It all makes its way into the courtroom and ultimately into the jury room. And that's why you can see such people who are on one side, like celebrating Diddy being acquitted on the much more serious charges, and other people who are like, how did this happen? I am upset. I feel like victims did not get justice today.
Right, exactly. And emotions did run really high, especially when the verdict came down, because I think I myself was pretty surprised at some of the jury's decisions in relation to some of the charges where they found him not guilty. But, obviously they made their decision. They listened to the evidence. They saw all the exhibits and they made the decision that they did. And say come sentencing that Sean Combs is sentenced to maybe a couple years behind bars in prison. But do you think even after this trial, after everything that we've learned, after the many civil lawsuits that were also filed, do you think that there's any type of way that Sean Combs can have a comeback at this point?
Well, I think there's certainly a comeback that could be crafted and created in which we as the public may see. Listen, this is a person who has lived his life in the public light, in the limelight for decades. Okay. And so, as has been said before, fame is one of the more addictive or most addictive drugs known to man. And so he was a very famous and now some might say infamous person. The idea that he allows the narrative to end with the way in which the evidence came in and this kind of mixed bag verdict does not is not what's the word I'm looking for? If I don't see Diddy allowing the last chapter of his book to be written with this trial, instead, the person that he's held himself out to be and who we now understand him to be is someone who is going to say, look, this was a dark chapter in my life, but now I'm going to show you the phoenix rising from the ashes. And there are other chapters. And I think that he will make an even more concerted effort to be more philanthropic, to be more of a victim's advocate. And also, once he completes these programs, he can say, look, I was once an abuser of women, abuser of drugs, abuser of fame, abuser of power and fortune, but look who I am now. And so I think that's a pretty powerful story. And frankly, people love comeback stories.
Yeah, they do love a good comeback story, but I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think that this is all just for maybe a showmanship, or do you think it's all for PR so that way, Diddy can walk out of MDC Brooklyn or possibly a potential prison and just be like, you know what, I am a changed person. But also in that same breath, what kind of message do you
Haters. Courtroom sketch artists worked feverishly, already knowing their drawings would be splashed across every news broadcast by nightfall. In the front row, a small cluster of Diddy's closest allies sat stiffly, whispering in low tones. Then came the moment. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The usual formalities felt sharper, more final this time. When they sat again, the air seemed to contract, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The judge began speaking. At first, it was procedural, recapping the charges, acknowledging the jury's work, noting the seriousness of the case. Diddy kept his gaze locked forward, his chin slightly lifted, almost as if he were daring the court to break him. His hands rested on the table, fingers interlocked, the faintest tremor visible in his knuckles. Then the tone shifted. The judge's voice deepened, slowed, words like aggravating factors, breach of trust, and irreparable harm rolled out into the space between them. Each phrase seemed to chip away at Diddy's composure. The jurors.
There's no comparable case of someone who is convicted of the Mann Act alone and not engaging in sex trafficking or a prostitution for financial gain, and they would be locked up like this. Talked about the issues plaguing the MDC, how it is dangerous, how he's not a risk of flight, not a danger to the community. But do you think Judge Arun Subramanian is going to be persuaded by your letter, by your motion, because obviously he specifically highlighted after the verdict your client's violence, how the defense asserted at trial that Combs was violent? Do you think he's going to have a change of opinion now based upon the legal papers?
Well, I think we certainly hope so. And, as we pointed out in the papers, the unfortunate violence that occurred was mostly a really long time ago, other than the one incident in June that Jane testified to, which was kind of unusual. I mean, they had been together for 3 years. There had been no violence, and she essentially started the fight. I'm not excusing anything, but it was kind of a one-off. And I think the government really hadn't put in any evidence of any recent violence. The Intercontinental video, remember, that was almost 10 years ago. He broke up with Cassie in 2018. And in our reply papers yesterday, we submitted a letter from Gina Hyun, who was one of the alleged victims, a different ex-girlfriend. And I think it was a pretty powerful letter about how Sean has changed, how she's not concerned about violence. She thinks he should be released on bail. So we're hoping that that will persuade the judge, given everything else, particularly, as you noted, like the really, really unusual nature of this particular Mann Act conviction and the fact that he's already been in prison, or jail rather, for like 11 months. This case is a one-off to begin with, but we're not aware of any case like this with a Mann Act conviction where anyone's done that much time to begin with. So.
And prosecutors, I'm imagining, have come back or will come back and say, well, listen, look, after the raids on his property, he engaged, or what they would say, he allegedly engaged in criminal activity and, obviously violence, they say, with Jane. But they say, look, what was in his hotel room when he was picked up in New York. They made allegations of what he was trying to do while he was in the MDC, whether it was using other inmates' phone privileges to have three-way phone calls. That was litigated before trial. What would be your response to say, you make the point that he is a changed person. The violence that was shown during the course of this trial is from years ago. But how would you convince the judge to say, listen, we are being truthful, we are being honest, we are being forefront, that he really is a different human being? Because the judge, again, this was right after the verdict and didn't have an opportunity for a briefing schedule. How can you make the argument that he is different and that he should be trusted?
Well, I mean, I think, the point you mentioned about the arrest, I mean, unfortunately, Sean has struggled with drug addiction for a long time. And I think one of the good things and positive things that has come out of his incarceration is given him an opportunity, to rehabilitate. He's committed to
sat in stoic silence, their expressions unreadable. And then, the sentence. It landed like a physical blow. Gasps erupted from the back of the room. A reporter dropped a pen. Somewhere, a chair creaked as someone shifted in disbelief. Diddy's reaction was instantaneous. His eyes went wide, his head snapped back slightly, and then, in an almost surreal moment, he started shaking his head slowly, as if to reject the very reality unfolding in front of him. "This is insane," he shouted, his voice cutting through the stunned quiet. "This isn't justice. This is a setup." The courtroom erupted into chaos. His attorneys scrambled to calm him, placing hands on his shoulders, leaning in to whisper urgent instructions. But Diddy wasn't listening. He pushed back from the table so hard that his chair skidded loudly across the floor. He was pacing now, pointing toward the jury box, his voice cracking under the weight of both anger and desperation. One juror shifted uncomfortably, eyes fixed on the floor. Another stared straight ahead, their jaw clenched, refusing to give him the validation of eye contact.
Man or a woman who engages the services of a sex worker who lives in New Jersey, and if they pay for their Uber, that technically is a Mann Act violation. Okay, so it's a morality crime, and that it just does not carry the same weight.
Will the judge say, hey, listen, multiple instances he was doing it. Not one Uber, he was doing it multiple times. You have two alleged victims here, Cassie, Jane, and violence, right? He used violence as one of the reasons to deny him bail. I wonder if he's going to look at, even though he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, different characteristics and components of his relationships with Jane and Cassie and say, this is aggravated.
It's a very interesting question. Can the court aggravate nonviolent offenses that he was convicted of, which are the Mann Act violations? Can he aggravate those when he was acquitted of the more serious charges, essentially acquitted of everything that involved violence, threats, all of that sort of thing? So
Right.
it's a very, very
Okay.
interesting legal question.
Real quick, asset forfeiture. What is that exactly? How would it work with Mann Act convictions?
I just don't see the feds having it being on very strong ground to seize a bunch of assets. And here's why, Jesse. Most of the federal cases where you have, especially RICO cases, an actual RICO case is an actual corrupt organization that the purpose is, like I had one in Salt Lake City last year. It was a fraud case where it was one of these calling room scam operations. Every dollar that they made in that, they made out of the bank account of some poor innocent victim who got scooped up in their scheme. So every dollar, everything they bought, every car, every house, everything that they owned was a direct result of money that they gleaned from innocent people. Those are the cases, or narcotics. We see this all the time in narcotics cases where but it's the same principle. All the things that they have are a result of narcotics profits, right? So when you look at one of those cases, you're seizing assets. Here we've got mansions all over the place. We've got planes. This is a very, very wealthy man who made that money legitimately in Bad Boy Records, in the music industry and in the film industry. That's how he made his money, and that is not a product. And that's where we come full circle to this square peg and a round hole regarding a RICO theory on this. The money, he didn't make any money from the freak offs. He didn't make any money from all of the alleged things he did. He didn't make any money from that horrible video that we saw where he's beating Cassie in that hotel. That's not the source of his income. So I think, again, I don't think that the feds or even the court, I don't think the court would look kindly on that. And there's an old adage in the law that you and I've talked about before. Bad facts make bad law, right? And if they run around and try to seize a bunch of stuff based on this, they're literally taking assets from a citizen that earned them legally. He may be a villain, he may be a bully, he may be a horrible person, but he made that money legally. He was not charged here with tax fraud, which means he paid taxes on it. He had accountants, he put it all together. So I don't see this judge. I think it'd be a very poor move if they try to take a bunch of his stuff. I think that they still have to create a nexus between the Mann Act violations and
I don't see it.
And his property, and I just don't see it.
I don't see it. Okay, well, he might need the money. Why? Because he's got a plethora of civil lawsuits that he's facing now. By the way, in fact, Tenny Garagos had something to say about that yesterday.
Sean Combs has not sexually assaulted anybody. I've been saying this for months. We've said it with each lawsuit that came out, and today that was proven true. The media got it wrong about Sean Combs every single day for nearly...
Judge, stone-faced, waited for the outburst to die down. Court officers began to move in. The moment they stepped closer, Diddy's pacing turned erratic. His voice rose again, this time tinged with something far more revealing: fear. No one expected it to come down like this. Not his legal team, not the fans who still believed in him, and certainly not Diddy himself. For weeks, the trial had been a tense tug-of-war between the prosecution's relentless push and the defense's carefully crafted arguments. Each side seemed to believe they were on the verge of a win, but as the final day arrived, the air was heavy with something else entirely: the weight of uncertainty. Diddy sat there in his tailored suit, shoulders squared, trying to project calm, but the slight twitch in his jaw gave him away. You could tell he had rehearsed every possible outcome in his head, but deep down, he didn't truly believe the worst could happen. After all, he was Diddy, the mogul, the icon, the man who had turned street hustle into a global empire. Men like him didn't fall this far, not in public, not like this.
The civil cases, let's start there real quick.
Well, what's very interesting about civil versus criminal cases is when somebody's convicted, of course, in a criminal case, because the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, It's called collateral estoppel. It means that for a civil case based on the same event or the same actions, you automatically win the civil case. Okay. So in other words, we saw this with Mike Tyson and his rape conviction, right? When he was convicted of rape, because it was beyond a reasonable doubt, and because the civil aspect only requires proof to a preponderance, that woman a million years ago when that case happened, all she had to do is prove damages. So it's already been proven. All right. What happened here, because he was acquitted of all these allegations, now each one of these plaintiffs bears the burden of proof. So this was not only a huge win for him criminally, this was a big win for Sean Combs when it comes to all those pending civil suits, because now those same people, in theory, would have to come in and testify. And remember, Don Richard is a good example. The cross-examination of Don Richard was excellent in my assessment. And I trained young prosecutors for years on how to do cross-examinations. I've taught it in law schools. That cross-examination was biting and it was really good. So now Don Richard, in her case, she's been really, I mean, ripped apart, I thought, on cross-examination in this case. So now she's kind of wounded. Her civil suit is that's her statements were all admissible in that. She
Interesting.
really there are some things she said on the stand that I think were very harmful to her case. She can still proceed with that, but I mean, if I'm her plaintiff's lawyer, I would be trying to find some sort of settlement and number. Who knows? These people, there's a lot to be said for this idea that they were all jumping on the bandwagon trying to get money. I think that argument,
So,
most judges are going to allow the defense to
well,
make that argument.
let me
I
ask you.
think that some of them will settle. Some of them
Yeah.
may still go to trial.
Well, let me ask you this real quick. From if they don't settle, real quick, would he just try to get rid of them as quickly as possible? Does he say, first argument is I'm going to try to anybody who's suing me under a pseudonym, I'm going to try to convince the court that they can't proceed under a pseudonym, because if they now have to reveal their names, maybe they'll be like, okay, I don't want to move forward. Or does he just move for a motion to dismiss on all of them? Can he try to group them together? I know I'm asking like complicated, like how to deal with 66 lawsuits at once, aside from the money that's going to go into it. Yeah.
Yeah, each one of those cases will have its own individual merits, and each one will have to be addressed separately. So yeah, he's going to have
Okay.
to pour a lot of money into his legal fund, but he was looking at life in prison. So how much of his fortune will go into defending all those lawsuits? Probably a substantial amount, but as we know, he's the guy has been able to pick out good musical talent and also good legal talent.
Yeah, and it does become a question what his career would be like after. Okay, before I let you go, I have to ask you about this new lawsuit that just came out. We're talking lawsuits. So there was a lawsuit that was filed just 2 days ago. This is a lawsuit filed out in California State Court. Edmund Laurent, former exotic dancer, he's filed a suit against Combs and a Jane Doe and other unnamed people, listing causes of action of assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligence, sexual battery, civil conspiracy, aiding and abetting, violation.
Then the judge began speaking, voice steady but laced with gravity. It started with the preamble, the acknowledgement of the charges, the recap of the evidence, the mention of prior incidents and aggravating factors. Diddy kept his eyes fixed on the bench, nodding slightly like he was still in control of the narrative, but that control vanished in an instant. When the judge announced the sentence, it was as if the entire room shifted. Gasps rippled through the gallery, reporters' pens froze mid-scribble, and Diddy froze. At first, he just sat there, blinking, as if his brain was struggling to translate the words into reality. But then, the shock gave way to something far more volatile, pure, unfiltered disbelief. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he pushed himself up, hands slamming on the table. His voice, usually smooth and commanding, cracked under the strain. He was shouting, not just at the judge, but at the jury, the prosecution, even his own lawyers. "This is insane," he yelled. "This isn't just..."
Family is like, yes, our father is coming home, our loved one is coming home, and we hope to see him very, very soon.
And talk about a reaction. Outside that courthouse, my gosh, what has been going on out there? There's what, verbal disputes, people spraying things. What is, just give us a brief summary of what you've witnessed outside that courthouse after the verdict.
I witnessed a lot, Jesse. A lot was going on. There was kind of, I will even say, pandemonium after the verdict was read. And outside, a lot of Diddy supporters, a lot of people who are kind of with the Free Diddy, I wouldn't say movement, but I guess, they believed in his innocence. They were very pleased, even thinking that it was a possibility he'd just walk outside of that courthouse at some point. But it was a lot of commotion. I did see some people getting to some heated debates, especially in relation to Cassie. I saw some people getting very upset because they believed that the government was trying to take a good man down who did a lot for the culture. Those types of conversations were being had from a lot of people in the public. I even saw some kind of weirder things, and that being people squirting baby oil on themselves. And one of the reporters even got some on her shirt by one of the people who were kind of over in that area. And so a lot was going on, to the point that I think the courthouse police were just kind of like, okay, we need everybody to calm down. They have barricades going all the way down the street. I think in the event that Sean Combs would have walked out of that courthouse, it would have just been straight chaos, I think, outside. But for the most part, especially with that not happening around that time frame, that a lot of people, especially his supporters, were very pleased. And obviously for some, they were a little disappointed with the verdict, but for most that we could see here at the courthouse, a lot seemed pleased by today's decision.
So, Elizabeth, let's talk about what happened next, because right after the verdict, it goes into the idea of, can he be released on bail? Okay, and the judge set a hearing for 5 p.m. So later on today, you literally, at the time of this recording, just got out of there. Remember, from a legal point of view, the burden is on the defense to show that Sean Combs is not a danger or won't flee. What was the judge's decision, and why did the judge decide that?
Well, given that the top of our show, Jesse, or the top of your show, because it's a sidebar presented by Law and Crime with the host of Jesse Weber, but given at the top of the show that we didn't announce that Sean Combs walked out of this courthouse, I think it was kind of a little bit of a spoiler for the viewers here that the judge decided to keep him behind bars until his sentencing hearing. So I did see kind of a little bit of disappointment from both Sean Combs and his family after the judge made his decision. So the judge said that the jury convicted the defendant on count 3 and 5, that being the Mann Act. He says bail is denied because the government correctly noted that detention is mandatory and it's not appropriate for Sean Combs to be released on bail given the charges that he's still been convicted of. And so the judge says that they disagree with the defense's argument, saying that any felony under 117, and Jesse, you probably know that more than me, requires detention. And he said even if the defendant is required to not be likely to present a danger to the community, the judge even kind of pointing out just some of what we had heard during the trial, where the defense conceded that the defendant, Sean Combs, was violent. The judge said, we own the domestic violence. And that was a word that he took from the transcript because Mark Agnifilo had said that in open court.
His words echoed against the walls, but they didn't carry the power they once did. They sounded desperate, raw, even frightened. Court officers moved in, ready to step between him and the bench. His attorneys tried to calm him, pulling at his sleeve, whispering urgent instructions, but Diddy wasn't hearing any of it. He was pacing now, eyes darting to the jurors as if searching for someone, anyone, who might still believe in him. One juror shifted uncomfortably in their seat, refusing to make eye contact. Another stared straight ahead, stone-faced, as though sealing off any chance of remorse changing their verdict. "You're ruining my life," he barked, his tone teetering between rage and panic. "I built everything from nothing. You can't do this to me." But they could, and they did. The judge's gavel cracked through the noise, sharp and final. Order was restored, at least on the surface. The sentence stood exactly as delivered. There would be no special privileges, no suspension, no quiet arrangement to keep him out of a cell. The judge's words were clear: the law applies to everyone.
That you think that sends to victims out there who may have been abused or, something had happened to them by a high-profile figure. They want to report this to police. They want to either go to maybe a civil lawyer, all of that stuff. But then after this trial, they are like, no, I can't do that. Look what happened in this case. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, there are definitely people who are victims advocates and victims themselves who think that this trial serves to kind of throw cold water, if you will, and chill victims who might want to come forward to express what happened to them, to initiate a criminal case, to initiate a civil case. They look at this case and say, at what cost is it to me personally to have to bare my soul, to only then be grilled on cross-examination, to have all of my intimate details bantied about, in the media, and then to be judged and then go through all of that. And I walk away in some ways empty handed. Now, that's certainly one way of looking at things. And there's a lot of credibility as it relates to understanding how someone could feel that way. The flip side, because remember, the scales of justice isn't just one side, there's two sides. The other side, if you will, is at what point in time does a person pay in full their price to society? And then once they've paid the price for their transgressions, at what point do you then look at that person and feel like, hey, you could be a changed person. You can redeem yourself. There's things that you can do to essentially prove to us as members of the public, as clients, as customers, that, you're a changed man. And so that's the hill Diddy has to climb. Whether he climbs that hill or not remains to be seen. But it's definitely a hill that's in front of him. And some might say it's not a hill, it's a mountain.
It is a mountain for Diddy. I think it might honestly be Mount Everest. It's a large mountain for him to scale, for I think people to possibly forget in their conscious what we learned in this trial. And I remember when Sean Combs, we've been covering this since Cassie's lawsuit, since 2023, November of that year. And I just remember thinking that there would be some type of reckoning within the hip hop community, the Black community, as far as Me Too goes, something kind of similar. And I thought, possibly, and I think maybe other people thought so too, that maybe Sean Combs was kind of that person that would, bring about this kind of reckoning in the hip hop community as far as Me Too goes. But do you think that can still happen? Do you think that will still happen?
Well, I think that Diddy's trial, served as a clarion call, a wake-up call, canary in the mine, so to speak, as it relates to you could be as powerful, as popular, as wealthy as Diddy. I mean, keep in mind, he called himself Brother Love. He got the key to New York City in the months or the year leading up to all of this, right?
Yeah.
And he was sitting on what some might say is the highest pedestal. And look how far he has fallen. Now, at the same time, you have that going on. And so people can look, if you really look at the case, and not just the legal case, but the case in the court of public opinion. And victims, if you will, won. Because he has, not only did he have a criminal case he had to deal with, but he has upwards of 20, 30 civil cases
I think
that
even
he's
more
also
than
going to have
that.
to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And each one of those cases, even if it's not proved by the victim that it happened, he is still going to have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney fees for each and every single case, and maybe millions for the more serious and those that get further down the line. So he's not done paying for his transgressions. And I think that for other people who are in similarly situated positions of power and influence,
Was the breaking point. You could see it in Diddy's eyes, that precise moment when the weight of reality settled in. He wasn't walking out of here. He wasn't going home to his mansion, his cars, his studio. He was going somewhere else entirely, somewhere he'd spent his life believing he would never, ever end up. As court officers escorted him toward the holding area, the gallery remained frozen. The only sounds were the shuffle of polished shoes on the tile and the faint click of camera shutters. Diddy glanced over his shoulder one last time, scanning the faces of his supporters. If he was looking for reassurance, he found none. Their expressions were a mixture of shock, sadness, and resignation. Outside, the courthouse steps became a stage for chaos. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions into the summer air. Fans and critics clashed in heated debates. Social media was already flooded with headlines.
That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency sweep that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC, as a jail, has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an
slow-motion clips of his outburst, and endless speculation about what this meant for his career, and for the music industry as a whole. Some voices framed it as a landmark in celebrity accountability, others painted it as the tragic fall of a self-made mogul. But no matter the angle, one truth was unavoidable: Diddy's reign had just been shattered in the most public and humiliating way possible. And as those courthouse doors closed behind him, sealing him off from the world he once ruled, there was an unshakable sense that this was only the beginning of a much darker chapter, one that no amount of influence, money, or legacy could rewrite. Because when the judge says the sentence stands, and you've just lost control in front of the jury, there's no more spin, no more performance, just the cold, hard reality of what comes next.